To start, press any key. Where's the any key?
Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1. No touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
Booster.
Go.
Retro.
Go.
Vital.
We go fly.
Guidance.
Guidance, go.
Okay, man, let's turn it burn.
Launch control, this is Houston. We are go for launch.
Dive, dive, dive. Let's put the hammer down.
Intruder alert! Intruder alert!
Get off my bridge!
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Nine! Yes! Yes! Yes!
Roger that.
Are you ready for a war?
Count up the usual suspects.
Follow me.
Certainly, what have I got to lose?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Smoke and mirrors, guys. Welcome to the movie factory.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Yeah.
Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
I thought I told you never to interrupt me while I'm working.
Proceed.
Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Isn't it about time for somebody's favorite radio program?
There is nothing wrong with your radio. Do not attempt to adjust it or change the station. We are in control. We will control the frequency and amplitude modulation. We will control the super heterodyne matrix. We are in control, baby, so keep your hand off the nose.
Take it away, boss.
Before we begin tonight, I'm going to give you all fair warning. I am feeling particularly curmudgeonly on this Saturday. What do you mean, how would you know this Saturday from any other Saturday? No, I'm really feeling curmudgeonly this Saturday. Why? Why do you ask? Well, it's simple. Do any of you pay attention? Am I the only one that watches things? The lemming-like nature of the human condition has been vividly on display this week and the past several weeks. And every now and again, I wonder, do you ever get this feeling when you're sort of, watching the idiocy of the human species? Do you ever get this vague notion that maybe, just maybe, you're the only rational, sane being on the planet? Or perhaps everybody else checked out a long time ago and just left their bodies behind. It's like that feeling I used to get when I was a tiny kid, every now and again, and sometimes I still get this feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'm the only conscious human being on the face of the earth, and all of the rest of you are simply an illusion, you see, or perhaps I'm a visitor from some alien world, or perhaps I need medication, a lot of it. Anyway, gang, I am your old psychotropic ingesting curmudgeonly host for this evening, Ray Crew. Welcome to Theater of the Mind. I think one of the reasons I am feeling so curmudgeonly tonight is that I've been on the road too much. And I mean literally on the road, driving on the road. I have been a prisoner of the Parkway far too often these past weeks. And when I am, the only company I have, the only thing I have to blot out the din of my own thoughts is the radio. And I just don't have a few channels of terrestrial radio. Oh no, gang, I've got 100 channels of satellite radio. And on every single one of them, especially if I am seeking news and information, what I find there leads me to the inescapable conclusion that a majority of the American people have been secretly lobotomized. And I apparently missed the memo. I missed my appointment. But what do you mean, what do I mean? Simple. I mean, let's look at the things that people apparently find surprising. If the news media is to be believed, it's quite shocking that it gets cold in the wintertime. Yes, the what is it? The Arctic vortex, the polar vortex, the whatever the heck that thing is. Oh wow! In the wintertime, it gets cold. If I had to watch one more time some news anchor from some place in the world throwing the wet T-shirt out the door and watching it freeze in midair, I think I would have jumped out of my own car. Here's one. You know, Bob, I put this glass of water outside 20 minutes ago, and but would you look at that? It's actually starting to freeze. Newsflash. When it gets below 32 degrees, water freezes. Now, if the water caught fire, that would be a news story. The other one that's particularly maddening and mind-numbing is what has now come to be called, inevitably, Bridgegate. You know what is it, Bridgegate? You know, the Chris Christie debacle that apparently caused heavy traffic in Fort Lee. Here's another big news flash. There's always heavy traffic in Fort Lee.
Let's kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
I drive the George Washington Bridge all the time, for good or ill. And the difference, in fact, I was even driving it during the lane shutdown back in September. And yes, I'm sure maybe it was a little bit worse than normal, but traffic jams on the approaches to the George Washington Bridge, another news flash. Again, the big news would have been if traffic moved across the George Washington Bridge. And okay, yes, it was a terrible thing. It was a very bad thing, if in fact it's true, as apparently it is, that one of the governor's aides or some of the governor's aides had a couple of lanes shut down as retribution because the mayor of Fort Lee wouldn't endorse Christie for re-election. But we're also surprised. Politics? What do you mean? Politics can sometimes be a dirty, rotten, awful game. It's like that scene from Casablanca. I am shocked to find that there's gambling going on here. Here's your winning, sir. Thank you. It leads me to wonder whether all of this shock and indignation is feigned or is it legitimate? Are people really surprised by this? Let's see what else was in the news that made me want to tear my hair out by the roots. Oh, yes, of course, the Alex Rodriguez thing that was going on. Not surprisingly, even after he had his suspension reduced, he turned around and sued Major League Baseball and the Players Union. Newsflash, A-Rod's a jerk. Wow, never saw that one coming. And by the way, the fact that 60 Minutes last Sunday devoted a full segment of the show to some greasy-looking, smarmy guy describing disgustingly all of the substances that A-Rod put into his body, some of which were apparently ingested in men's rooms at various spots in Miami and other places. I thought to myself, you know, as I'm watching this, I was trying to imagine the spirits of Edward R. Murrow and Eric Sevareid and even Walter Cronkite seriously doing a story about this. And every time, I don't know the name of the CBS reporter that was doing the interview with the guy from Florida who had the clinic that was giving A-Rod and I guess other players all of these wacky drugs that apparently made them hit home runs. But he had this look of shocked, righteous indignation. Did you, sir, not realize what you were doing to the game of baseball? And the guy turns around. Of course, he's like sweating profusely. You know, I love baseball. I do. And as if that wasn't nausea-inducing enough, there was the interview that righteously indignant, steely-haired CBS correspondent did with Bud Selig. Yes, another great monument of integrity. Yeah, Bud, too, of course, expressed his shock, anger, and outrage that players were ingesting all sorts of performance-enhancing drugs. Yeah, just the fact that all the home runs they hit resurrected baseball from the great dumpster of life after the strike, Bud, and that you presided over all of it, Bud. No, we're not going to even mention that. It's hard to imagine, though, if in fact this 60 Minutes had been done back in the days of Murrow and Severide and Cronkite and that crowd. Can you imagine the cutaway shot, back to Murrow, and he's sort of sitting there looking in that surly kind of penetrating way that he always did, with the cigarette dangling and the smoke curling up. And somehow I don't think he would have let Bud get away with it the way this guy did on 60 Minutes. So you see, gang, this is the stuff that bugs me. And obviously it doesn't bother any of you. I should probably, I probably should just go right ahead and get that lobotomy and just be done with it. And how ironic it is that our first news item tonight concerns being lobotomized. Yes, a Wall Street Journal investigation revealed some little-known information about America's foremost advocate for frontal lobotomies, the late Dr. Walter Freeman. Why, you say, was the Wall Street Journal doing a feature on lobotomies? I could not tell you. At any rate, the late Dr. Freeman performed an estimated 3,500 lobotomies during the 1940s and 50s before opposition finally solidified against him. At the peak of his influence, he was so confident that he demonstrated the procedure to skeptics by hammering an ice pick from his own kitchen into both eye sockets of an electrically shocked patient, and then toggling the ice picks around the brain tissue. He said he was certain that he was, quote, correctly, unquote, severing what he had to sever. For years, Freeman, a neurologist untrained in surgery, marshaled positive feedback from enough patients and families for the procedure to survive criticism, and he spent his final years until his death in 1972 securing testimonials to prove the validity of lobotomies. What, one wonders, does a pro-lobotomy testimonial sound like? I would rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. In other news, homeless man James Brady had his New Jersey state benefits cut off in October for, quote, hiding, unquote, income. You see, Mr. Brady had found $850 on a sidewalk in April, and he turned it in. When no one came forward, it was returned to him. He was unaware, however, that he needed to report it as income. Once again proving if you find money, put it in your pocket. In a related story, a 16-year-old Fox Chapel, Pennsylvania boy realized at a football game this past fall that he was inadvertently carrying a pocket knife. He conscientiously turned it in to a security guard, which earned him a 10-day school suspension. You see, the school's zero-tolerance rule about carrying weapons to school meant that he was gone for 10 days. The boy's father said it sends a message that you should probably lie. It also sends a message that most zero-tolerance rules are the same as zero-thinking rules. In another related story, Betty Green was fired as clerk at the Speedway gas station in Lexington, Kentucky this past November when she just said no to an armed robber. She literally just said no. He came in, held her at gunpoint, asked for the money. She said no. He shrugged his shoulders, smiled, and walked out. And all would have ended happily had she just kept her mouth shut. Dumbly, she told her boss, who had to fire her because, you see, company rules require that when confronted, you simply give up the money. Green said, and I quote, I don't think anybody knows what you're going to do till it happens to you. That's how they talk in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm sorry you didn't like my impersonation. And the news goes on. Jim Howe, father of 2 children at South Cumberland Elementary School in Crossville, Tennessee, was handcuffed and briefly detained by a sheriff's deputy this past week after mistakenly believing he could walk his kids home when class let out at 2 p.m. Actually, the school allows 2 p.m. departures only for kids being picked up in cars. Pupils who leave on foot must wait till 2:35. Howe assumed that the waiting period was only to protect young pedestrians from pickup traffic, However, Deputy Avery Yates said a rule's a rule, and unfortunately, Hal broke it. That's why he was handcuffed, and if he didn't further cooperate, he could be jailed. Coghlan Elementary School in Langley, British Columbia, announced to parents in November that henceforth it would not just prohibit abusive or unwanted physical contact among its children, but in fact all contact of any type. Officials said they were responding to parents who objected to, quote, rough play, unquote. But, said one parent, incredulous, what? No tag? No hugging? No touching? I'm not going to tell my daughter she can't touch her friends at school. I'm just going to teach her boundaries. Oh, now will you stop being rational? There is positively no room for rationality here in a lobotomized society. What's the matter with you people? While many educators lament the mediocrity of American universities in encouraging the study of science and engineering, U.S. colleges are among the world leaders in one area: sensitivity, especially to students questioning their gender. In the current year, Bellevue College and Mills College in Washington and Oakland, California, respectively, have offered students unprecedented choices of self-identification. Male or female is no longer useful at Bellevue, which offers a list of the following. Pick one: feminine, masculine, androgynous, gender-neutral, transgender, and other. At Mills, students have the choice of agender, bigender, third gender, or gender fluid. And they select the pronoun they wish to be referred to. They can choose he, she, sie, sie, as in the German, vi, or the agrammatical they. Gender fluid. That typically happens just before closing time at the Pilot House. What do I mean by that? Don't even try to. Just don't try. It's much too complicated to explain to you. And in our final story, proving once again that dumbness is everywhere. The daunting problems that faced the launch of healthcare.gov in October were merely symptoms of the federal government's often snail-like pace at integrating digital innovations that are common to everyday America. The New York Times, of all newspapers, has revealed that the Federal Register, that's the daily journal of the U.S. government, still receives original content on 3.5-inch floppy disks. And its work order authorizations come on 3.5-inch floppy disks, hand-delivered by courier. Oh, I don't know about that internet thing, Bob. I think it's gonna, I don't think it's gonna last. I don't care what Al Gore says. Contractors can be frustrated because they operate with top-of-the-line digital efficiency. However, they must downgrade to interface with the government. Well, I'm not surprised. What are we to make of all this, gang? The fact that the news media treats us as if we have the IQ of a rotting turnip. The fact that zero-tolerance policies are everywhere a substitute for common sense and judgment. The fact that the government still uses floppy disks and thinks that's a good idea. Is it my imagination? Have you noticed it too? Does it appear that civilization as we know it is going to hell on greased skids? Well, I think it is. But I have a theory. I have a theory why, or at least I have a pretty good idea of what one of the major causal factors is. And I offer this tonight not only to you, the audience, but if there are any of you out there who are looking for a doctoral dissertation topic, and you are in a discipline like, philosophy or psychology or sociology or one of those ologies, this could really just be the ticket for you. That's okay. No need to thank me. My thesis revolves around the fact that civilization as we know it, prompted no doubt by information overload and all the things that we are subject to, we are suffering currently from a potentially terminal case of groupthink. Do you know what is it, groupthink? You've heard of that term before, groupthink? Yeah, groupthink is what happens when a group of, otherwise intelligent, rational human beings are infected by some dumb idea that gets reinforced over and over again because everyone nods and smiles and says, well, of course. Groupthink is, in fact, well, it basically does have the same effect as a frontal lobotomy on the entire civilization. And by the way, if you think you are immune to the effects of this, think again. Experiments have been done for years that prove that we are an incredibly suggestible species. One of the most famous experiments, you might have heard about this one if you took Psych 101 way back when. It goes something like this. You bring a bunch of test subjects into a room, and one of the walls in the room is made of glass. On the other side of the glass is someone sitting there with electrodes attached to their hands and their arms and their head. And the test subjects that are standing there looking at this person are told by someone who's wearing a white lab coat and carrying a clipboard that they are there to participate in an experiment. And the person with the white coat and the clipboard says something to the effect of, well, Brack, thank you very much for helping us in our research. We are going to be studying the effects of electrical currents on the human being. And since we want to be sure that our observations are accurate, we're going to ask each of you to take very detailed notes of what you observe as greater and greater voltages are applied to the subject there on the other side of the glass. And I would like each of you to take a turn administering the voltage while the rest of you make careful notes about what the subject does. And then the person in the white coat with the clipboard leaves the room. After which, each person turns this little knob. Now, of course, in reality, the little knob isn't connected to anything, and the person on the other side of the glass is just an actor with fake electrodes attached to him. But these people don't know that, and they start turning the dial. And they turn the dial up to the first notch, and the person twitches and makes all sorts of odd facial contortions as if he's being electrified. And they'll make careful notes in their little book there, their little copy books that they were given, and then they keep on turning up the voltage. You see. And ultimately, they have the voltage turned all the way up to the point where this poor actor on the other side of the glass is screaming and writhing in agony, at which point the experiment stops and the guy in the white trench coat, or the white lab coat rather, with the clipboard comes back in and explains what the experiment really was all about and asks them, well, why did you keep on administering these horrible shocks? Couldn't you see the person was in pain? And their typical answer is, well, you said to do it. Yeah, I was merely following orders. We've heard that one before, haven't we, gang? So you see, we are a very suggestible species. And again, lest you think that, no, I would never participate in such a thing. I am far too ethical and moral and cool and groovy a person to ever do that. Well, they've conducted this experiment across all ages, sexes, creeds, religions, cultures in virtually every corner of the world, and the results are pretty much the same every time. So you see, this says a lot, you see, about why we do dumb stuff. Now, of course, if you want to take groupthink to its logical conclusion, then you've got a mob. Now, we all know that, people do things in a mob that they would never do individually. Have you ever actually been in a mob? It's one thing to stand aside and judge a mob harshly and say, well, look at those maniacs. Why are they doing that horrible thing? Well, put yourself right in the middle of it and see what you might do. Because it seems like a good idea at the time. Oh, yes, I'll admit it. I was in a mob. Not too many. I tend to avoid mobs in general, but I kind of remember one from when I was in college. Well, I think the statutes run out on this one by now, but remember when the Flyers won the Stanley Cup the first time? Yeah. Remember that big mob that pushed the SEPTA bus over? Well, the Flyers won. I mean, that's what you do when the Flyers win. You push over a bus. So yeah, we're all susceptible to this thing. We're all susceptible to groupthink, to giving up on our own rational judgment. And it is kind of easy because the world does not encourage free thinking, gang, in case you hadn't figured that one out yet. The world does not encourage uniqueness. The world, or civilization, for its own short-term ends, likes conformity. We don't want you to go too far astray from the herd. We don't want you to challenge anything. Just kind of stay in the middle there, right? Just kind of stay in the middle, and we're going to just keep on moving in this direction because that just seems to be the only safe thing to do. Outliers, people who try to do things differently, people, in fact, who sometimes try to step up and lead the herd, who try to redirect the groupthink, sometimes don't come to a good end. Did you have to read the book Lord of the Flies in high school? Remember that one, Lord of the Flies? Yeah, what do they do to the kid who tries to lead them? Yeah, that's it. The head is stuck on the yeah, right, that's the Lord of the Flies before the grown-ups come back. So trying to go against the herd, trying to swim against the current sometimes doesn't turn out very well. So yeah, I do believe that if you look at all of the forces that are continually attempting to lobotomize us from the news media, and I'm not making this as a partisan political comment. I'm not going to stand here and talk about, well, the liberal bias of the media. I don't even care about that. There's only one bias that the news media has, and it's shared equally by left and right, and that is the bias toward turning the news into bread and circuses. It's entertainment, gang. It's all about selling soap. We know that. That's the reason the local news is as vapid and awful as it is. That's the reason you have stories like, gee, Bob, look, the water is freezing because it's below 32 degrees. Because that's what they've decided you need, you see. That's the 6th grade level that they've decided you all function at. It's the reason all talk radio is essentially unlistenable. Because it's not about real ideas. It's not about free thinking. It's not about looking at things in unique ways. It's about yelling and hollering, because that's good theater. You know, I mean, put it this way. The ancient Romans didn't come to the Colosseum to listen to philosophers debate. No, they came to see Christians get thrown to the lions, or they came to see gladiators kill each other, because, heck, that's good theater. All right. And hey, I'm not being self-righteous. I like good theater just like the rest of you. Heck, I'm in the theater business most of the year, so I completely understand that. But it is important just to be aware of the fact that it's bread and circuses. Here's your homework assignment, gang, by the way. Between now and next week, I want each of you to go out there on Netflix or Vudu or Hulu or one of those services, and I want you to look up the movie Network. It came out in 1976, starring Peter Finch. Would have won Best Picture had it not been for the fact that Rocky came out that year. And yes, in that movie, Peter Finch plays an aging network news anchor who is being pushed out. He is facing forcible retirement because he is, in fact, in the movie, he is a holdover from the old days, from the days of Ed Murrow and Severide and Cronkite and all those like real serious news guys. And even back in 1976, Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote the screenplay for Network, could foresee what was coming. Chayefsky understood that what was quickly going to happen to the news business it was going to turn into the entertainment business. And so he wrote this incredibly prescient screenplay. In it, Paddy Chayefsky predicted very accurately that the news business, that the business of news and information and informing the populace was going to evolve into the entertainment business. I shouldn't say evolve, merge with the entertainment business to the point where the two would become indistinguishable. And in fact, that has happened. And the character that Peter Finch plays in the movie, Howard Beale, the aging anchor, gets turned into this new kind of a character. He's not a newsman, he's an entertainer. He's actually an ideologue. Instead of giving the news, he rants and raves. Now, it all starts in the movie when he does it as a symptom of his own descent into madness, you see. All of a sudden, if you recall the film, he throws down his script and he starts ranting at the camera. He says, "Look, you people, you're all a bunch of sheep. You're the ones that are real. We're the fakes. So I want you to go out." I'm doing my best Peter Finch now. I want you to turn off your televisions, turn them off. I want you to go to the window. I want you to throw the window open. I want you to scream, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore." And of course, people do that all over the place as a symptom of the fact that, well, people were mad as hell, but they were also easily led. And so what began in the movie as this populist reaction ended up being co-opted by the powers that be, and once again, groupthink prevailed. Now, I want you to consider for a minute how much time you spend having this stuff force-fed to you. It's all around us. And it's so ubiquitous, which, by the way, means all around us if you're in Dennis Township. It's so ubiquitous we don't even notice it anymore. The constant drumbeat telling us what to think, telling us what to believe, telling us what's important. To get back to talk radio for a second, one of the things that makes it so ultimately unlistenable after a while or unwatchable is the fact that you already know what these people are going to say before they say it. Have you heard anybody, any talking head, any member of the chattering class, either political or from the media, say anything that really surprised you? Ever? Of course not. You know, if you turn on Rush Limbaugh, you pretty much know what Rush is going to say. Whether you agree with him or not, he's not going to surprise you. If you turn on Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, you pretty much know what she's going to say. Now, she may say it well, and you might agree with her, but there you are. If you get your news from MSNBC, you can pretty much predict what you're going to hear. Ditto Fox, ditto CNN. It's all served up to us this way. So it's not really about thinking anymore. It's not really about exercising independent judgment. It's about going with the herd that we are most comfortable being around. So if you're a Fox News type, that's where you stay. And people keep telling you what you want to hear and you nod. And if you're part of the MSNBC crowd or the NPR crowd, you go there. And they tell you what you want to hear and you nod. And so ultimately then you have these two little pockets of groupthink, you see, both completely convinced of their righteousness and of the fact that the others, the other herd over there, the other group thinkers, while they're just evil and awful and rotten, and we, of course, are the ones that know the way. We have seen the light. Can you tell me I'm wrong? Now, this is pretty much the way things are. Now, you'd like to think, well, we can make fun of this all day. Groupthink can be funny. People do dumb things when they're in the throes of groupthink. They say dumb things. Except after a while, it gets harder and harder to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. It gets harder and harder to distinguish between what the herd is whispering in your ear and what you really think and believe. Because pretty soon, the voice of groupthink, the constant whispering and chattering, drowns out your own inner voice until you can't hear your inner voice anymore. Or worse, your inner voice just gives up. So it's worth asking, when did this begin? When did we as a civilization become so prone to groupthink? Was there, in fact, a time when people were more rational, when they were independent thinkers, when they were less prone to being led around, at least mentally, in large herds? Well, of course, human beings have always been led in large herds for one reason and another. That's how dictatorships work. So let's just look at this country for a moment. Let's not worry about the rest of the world. Let's just focus on us. Because you see, we were always supposed to be different. We were supposed to be the grand experiment. We were supposed to be the place that was, in fact, dedicated to the integrity of the individual and to their right to think and believe and say what they wanted to think, believe, and say. Isn't that the reason we began this whole thing? I think so. So let's just look at us. Was there a moment in history when things changed? You could probably make an argument for lots of them. Did it all change after World War II? Or did it happen during the Great Depression, perhaps? Some people could argue for that. Some people could argue that, well, yes, it was after World War II when we suddenly had this great homogenized society. Did it happen in the 60s? Or were the 60s a reaction against it in some sense? What role does technology play? Can you blame the internet? Well, you probably could. Is it all Facebook's fault? Well, certainly these things have done nothing to counter the trend. And yes, of course, I demonize the media, but, there was, in fact, a time when the media did offer up objective, rational news and commentary and thought. It was always biased to some extent. There was never anything that even began to be purely objective. Pure objectivity doesn't really exist. But there was at least an attempt to be objective. There was at least an attempt to present the facts rather than to come on the air already being assumed to be in one camp or another. Now there is not even a pretense of it. That's because there was a time when, in fact, the news media was dedicated to more than profit. And don't for one second think I'm demonizing profit. I love profit. I love money. You see in me a staunch defender of capitalism and individualism and the American way and doing what's in your rational self-interest. That's the way the world works. That's a healthy thing. What the news media forgot is that sometimes doing what's in your rational self-interest may not necessarily put a buck in your pocket in the short term. But that's another topic for another day. When's the moment in history, then, when we turned? Well, you could make an argument for lots of them. I'm going to pick one. And the one I pick has to do, interestingly enough, with the space program. Yeah, think about that for a second. The space program. Now, you guys all know that I am a space geek. I've never made any secret of that fact. I grew up with the space program. I grew up as a little kid watching the first launches in the Mercury program and the Gemini program, and then, of course, Apollo. I have clear memories, literally clear memories of watching John Glenn go up in space. And I'm not that old. I was only maybe 5 when that happened. I have distinct memories, of course, of watching our first steps on the moon. I was very much aware of the shuttle program, the space shuttle program. For a while there, I actually worked as a consultant for Thiokol Corporation. You know, what is it, Thiokol Corporation? Yeah, they're the folks that when there was a space shuttle, they're the folks that designed the solid rocket boosters, those two big towering rockets that would sit on either side of the big hydrogen liquid fuel tank in the middle. Yeah, I worked for the company that actually designed those suckers. So even though I never got to be an astronaut, which is, of course, what I wanted to be when I was a kid, I did get to hang around the space program. During my Thiokol days, which was, way back in the 90s, I got to actually meet astronauts. And I got to meet some of the people that were a part of the space program from its earliest days. People that we used to refer to as steely-eyed missile men, and they were mostly men back then. These were the guys that actually had crew cuts and wore pocket protectors and still had a slide rule on their desk just in case the calculator was wrong. These are the guys that actually put us in space. I will tell you, among that crowd of people, you would find no groupthink. There was no lemming-like behavior. These were truly original thinkers. These were the guys who were standing there watching John Kennedy at Rice University back in 1962 when he stood there and he said, "And we will put a man on the moon within this decade." Remember? That's my John Kennedy impersonation. We will put a man on the moon within this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Not bad, eh? Yeah, they were actually watching that speech. And they knew they were going to be the guys that had to pull this off. Now, when you think about it, what Kennedy said back in 1962 was outrageous. At the time he committed us to put a man on the moon by the end of the 60s, which at that point was about 8 years away, we were a distant second to the Russians in the so-called space race. We hadn't even really gotten anybody successfully into orbit yet. But what followed from that was probably an example for those 8 years of what the best and the brightest can do when they're unleashed and allowed to think new thoughts. Say what you will. Now, of course, you could argue the counter and say, gosh, back in those days, that was the Cold War. And the only reason we ever went to the moon was because we wanted to beat the Russians. And, we were afraid they were going to drop bombs on us. And you'd be right. Maybe in that sense, it was a kind of a madness. But when you think about the threat that we truly believed was posed by the Soviet Union, it wasn't groupthink or madness. It was simply self-preservation. But this unleashed more creativity, more innovation, more commitment to doing what was right and what worked than we've probably ever seen in our history. And that's why it's really kind of sad when you look at what the space program is today and remember what it used to be. Now, at what moment then did all that end? Well, it didn't necessarily end with the end of the Apollo program, although it is sad that we stopped going there after 1972 because, well, after Apollo 17, we'd done it before, and it cost too much money. And by then, of course, the bill was coming due for the Vietnam War and the Great Society, and it was getting kind of hard to write those big checks, at least for that. And some years went by, and you might remember what came after Apollo. There was there was Skylab. Remember Skylab, which was the early forerunner to the space station, which Skylab eventually broke up and fell out of the sky. There was the historic Apollo-Soyuz hookups when we still had these Saturn V rockets sitting around to do something with them, so we'd send them up there and we would dock with the Russian Soyuz craft, and we had the historic handshakes, between the cosmonauts and the astronauts. That was kind of cool. That was like back in the mid-70s. And then, of course, come the 80s, we had the beginning of the Space Shuttle program, which just ended about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Now, if you look at the Space Shuttle, you guys know, I'm not trying to be too geeky or scientific with you here, but the Space Shuttle was obviously something designed by committee. It was. I mean, let's look at the way they put this sucker together. The Space Shuttle, of course, was designed to be something that, the orbiter was designed to be something you could reuse. Up until then, once the human being carrying part of the spacecraft came back, it would splash into the ocean, into the Pacific typically. And that was it. It went off to the Smithsonian Institute or was put in a warehouse somewhere. It was never going to be used again. The entire spacecraft disintegrated or fell apart. It was all used up, essentially. Whereas the Space Shuttle was designed to be reused. Every part of it was reused. Even the two big solid rocket boosters, once they separated from that big hydrogen tank in the middle and fell off, they would drop in the ocean, and Thiokol would come and fish them out of the ocean and take them back up the Mississippi, refurb them, and put them up again. That big hydrogen fuel tank, same thing. They'd pick that thing up out of the ocean and reuse it, and of course the orbiter landed. That was the theory. But I'll tell you something. When you've seen those things sit on the launch pad, and if you remember, what they'd look like, what you really basically had there were those big solid rocket booster things. They were like two bombs. They were essentially highly explosive bombs. they were packed with a substance that looks for all the world like what you find at the end of a pencil eraser. And there's a nozzle down there at the bottom, and once they light that candle, it's nothing more than a controlled explosion, essentially, which would last for about 2.5 minutes until the thrust was sufficient to get the whole stack into the air, and then it would fall away. And then, of course, the hydrogen fueled rocket would take over for the rest of the ride. So yeah, what you had there were essentially, when you saw a shuttle sitting on the pad, you had 2 bombs strapped to a big gigantic tank of liquid hydrogen, the most explosive liquid known to mankind. Yeah, there's a party.
Let up midnight,
40 seconds. Columbia now 39 nautical miles to altitude, 42 nautical miles downrange. Columbia, you're looking a little hot and all your calls will be a little early. Youngest trip is really moving out. Now velocity now reading 6,200 feet per second. Glad you're enjoying it. Columbia, Houston, we have 40 seconds to LOS. The bigger LOS, you're looking good burning over the hill. We'll see you at Madrid. And we enjoyed the music, Bob. Thank you.
In a couple of weeks, it will be the 28th anniversary of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, which occurred on January the 28th, 1986, when Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into its flight and led to the deaths of 7 crew members. And that is the moment that I pick for the beginning of Groupthink, at least the pernicious version we have today. And here's the reason I say that. The Challenger disaster occurred fairly early in the history of the shuttle program. It was the first flight to feature a real civilian, not a test pilot, a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, a 6th grade teacher from New Hampshire, who trained along with the astronauts and was going to go up there and not only teach from space, she was going to demonstrate, dramatize the fact that space travel now was not the purview of test pilots and space cowboys, but was in fact safe and repeatable, and it was going to be open for all of us, you see. At least that was the message. The Challenger flight, this particular flight, known in the parlance as STS-51-L, it was originally set to launch on January the 22nd. But delays with the previous mission caused it to be moved to the 23rd and then to the 24th because of weather, and then again to the 25th because of bad weather. And finally, on the morning of January 28th, they were going to try again. Now, that particular morning was special because that night, Ronald Reagan was scheduled to give the State of the Union address, and he really wanted to be able to stand there in the well of the Senate, and he wanted to be able to say, above us tonight, there is circling an American teacher. And he wanted to cite that as proof that the shuttle program was, in fact, not just a boondoggle for a bunch of contractors, because, of course, the shuttle was always a mission with no destination, that it did, in fact, have some reason for being. Of course, at that point, the International Space Station was just a distant dream. It was very important to the government to be able to do this. And of course, NASA exists at the behest of the federal government. So let's follow the money, shall we? Because when you follow the money, you can usually figure out why things happen in life. NASA only exists because of taxpayer dollars. Those taxpayer dollars, of course, are regulated by the administration and the Congress. The administration and the Congress is theoretically beholden to and accountable to the people. So you've got to convince the people that space is worth investing in. And let's see, on the other side, who is it that's ultimately beholden to NASA? Well, all the NASA contractors. So if you follow the money, it goes like this: taxpayer, government, NASA, contractors. That's very important. Keep that in mind. It's going to help explain what happens next. On the morning of the launch, the temperature was 28 degrees. It had been below freezing for 12 hours. Now, these gigantic solid rocket boosters, the things I told you about earlier, those 2 big bombs that were designed by Thiokol Corporation, they were not designed to fly in temperatures below 53 degrees. And so when it came time to make a go, no-go decision for this spaceflight, Thiokol engineers said no go. Now, of course, that's a NASA tradition, the telecon, where they go around the horn before the launch, and everybody that represents every contractor, from Rockwell to the people that built the hydrogen tanks to the people that built the orbiter, all have to say go. Well, on the night of the 27th, when they did that, Thiokol engineers said no go. NASA wanted to know why. Well, the engineers, headed up by a guy named Roger Beaujolais, said, we can't certify those big solid rocket boosters to fly. It's too cold. Well, what does the temperature have to do with it? Well, you see, folks, just to give you a quick science lesson, this bomb, these 2 big bombs that were strapped on either side of this liquid hydrogen tank, were put together in sections, and the sections were held together by these flexible rubber rings called O-rings. It was designed essentially to keep the explosion inside and not let the gases escape. In cold temperatures, the O-rings become brittle and they can't seal the explosion inside, you see. That's what Thiokol engineers understood. So once again, they went around, and the Thiokol engineers said no. Well, now their bosses got involved. And they asked, do you have proof that the solid rocket boosters will fail in these temperatures? Well, of course, the engineers didn't have that proof. They'd never run the experiments. So finally, they felt pressured into saying yes. They could have stopped it at any time. They could have spoken out against the groupthink. Oh, yes, they would have put their jobs in jeopardy. Who knows if they would have ever been employed in aerospace again? And of course, 73 seconds into the flight, what they feared was going to happen happened. One of the O-rings, made brittle by the cold, failed, letting hot gases from the solid rocket booster burn away the strut that held it to the rest of the spacecraft, and also igniting the liquid hydrogen in the tank. 7 astronauts died. These engineers, folks, were not men prone to emotion. They were, as I said, steely-eyed missile men. They were pocket protector-wearing, slide rule-using guys who dealt in facts. Yet I tell you, it was my privilege to get to know them when I worked with Thiokol. And if you put a beer or two into one of these guys, they would weep, because they knew full well the price of groupthink. They didn't blame NASA, they didn't blame their bosses, they blamed themselves. They knew that at any time they could have made a different decision, but they didn't. They knew the price of groupthink, certainly better than any of us.
I'd say that was a pretty successful broadcast.